Friends, we are planning to discuss the intersection of architecture with dance today. The intersection of architecture with dance involves issues of movement, geometry, the body and space. It has been proposed that by studying this intersection, architects may find ways to generate built form originating in movement, and that this can supplement or complement each other, more formal means of doing so. Both dance and architecture have a sensibility for space, movement and form. While human bodies move and explore this innate quality, built architecture is made to be fixed and stable in large measure. Yet, since architecture is experienced through movement, architects explore ways to express movement. Thus, though their reasons are dissimilar, their goals do overlap. The spaces created by both artistic means and those created by everyday purposes might seem diametrically different, though they primarily differ in sense of time. For creation and sustained definition, the volumes and forms they evoke are based on analogous values. The principles followed in artistic space and also have an added advantage of still retaining the primeval sense of the haptic experience. Since dance deals with the designing the relationship of forms, that is bodies, moving through space, it is a rich resource for exploration of ideas that can inform architecture, which deals with the design of the relationship of objects in space. The desire to understand, experience and surpass gravity is a mutual goal of a dance and architecture. The advantages dance enjoys in the act of space making include this response to gravity. It might be varied, but it always intense and obsessive. The constant need to find one's center is another admirable policy architects could emulate. The geometrical abstraction and the description portrayed by the dancing body in space immediately assume layers of associative meaning that add depth and relevance. Architect Mark Skogin, who is a partner in Mark Skogin Merrill LM Architects Incorporation, MSME Architects in Atlanta, Georgia, claims that dance is closer to architecture than any other form is. He enumerates 7 points of similarity which are given below. He writes that dance, like architecture, 1. Traces space, time and movement and relies on light, content, context, structure and timing for order. 2. Is constructed of the human figure and occupied by human spirit. 3. Involves a relentless struggle with the natural forces of gravity and the individual limitations of human physicality. 4. Employs the illusionary effect of procession, perspective, point of view, color and light. 5. Demands precise technique and craft. And 6. Requires knowledge of its tradition, history and theory for substance and orientation. 7. Stimulates an awareness of the reciprocal line between the body and the mind. It is obvious that the choreographic design process bears many similarities to the architectural design process. While the means of realization and the experience of the realized work are different, the process of conceptualizing the work involves similar mental faculties. The ability to visualize forms in space and the movement of bodies and around those forms are central to both processes. Abstraction, modes of expression, structural concerns, notations and typological classifications of elements are features that are shared by these disciplines of dance and architecture. However, it can be said of most artistic disciplines that they share one or more of the same concerns with architecture. What makes dance potentially unique in the comparison with architecture is that both deal with form and movement in physical space, and that form is both conceptual and physical. The two forms of expression through architecture and movements are analogical and contemporary. Movement is living architecture. The architecture created by human movement is defined by pathways, tracing shapes in space, and architecture is frozen rhythms, a concretized articulation of human movement. This understanding immediately opens up fresh relationship between the animate form, body, design processes and space making. Interdisciplinary studies thus develop an opportunities to generate new work with greater understanding, whether choreography or architecture. Benefits of studying the dancing body in architecture. In architecture, form rather than space or movement tend to be the force of attention. We tend to consider space simply as the void within or around the form, and movement as a completely different domain. As discussed earlier, this is of great concern. Dancers, however, continue to stress on the haptic experience of space, how the body feels and moves through space. Thus, a study of movement and understanding of space through a dancer's point of view holds valid and highly advantageous. Artistic space also has the benefit of being conceptualized and created with relativity, lesser physical restraints and limitations. Its only binding aspect is that of the body and its relation to other elements of bodies. This allows the space to be more honest. Such temporal space, though completely layered, is usually defined with an elegant simplicity. The transference and interpretation of these methods in architecture as everyday space will be interesting and might introduce better processes to articulate such values. There is a stark contrast between rational knowledge and intuitive knowledge. We can distance ourselves, see things objectively, and thereby indirectly as a rationalized knowledge. Else, we may get into the skin of the experience and understand haptically. Human movements ultimately traces complex spatial configurations. It is up to the sculptor of space to understand and intensify these existing patterns and design a harmonious concretization that satisfies both the intellectual and somatic aspects of existence of all bodies and elements. In architecture, the way before us includes increasing importance to the rights of an individual and the reconquering of intimate life within a rapidly growing public realm. Studying the creation of space through the medium of dance could point out clues in the right direction. Architectural spaces too ideally begin within the needs of an individual and spread out to encompass its environs, marking their stance in the indefinite volumes of earth space. While the complete volume follows a certain rhythm that enclose and interpret other spaces, this space also should finally end back in the heart of the individual to his complete satisfaction. Dance and architecture have much in common. Both are concerned with the practices of space. For a dancer, the act of choreography as a writing of place occurs through the unfolding of spatial dimensions through gestures and embodied body movements. For the architect, space is the medium through which form emerges and habitation is constructed. For both the first experience space in the body, that is said by Carol Brown, the choreographer. This mutual interest in movement and form is perhaps the overlap area that is richest in the potential for the furthering of architectural design. Until recently, there has been a bias towards creating unusual external forms in contemporary architectural practice. However, perhaps as a backlash against what is sometimes perceived as excessive and onanistic expression, there has been a gradual shift away from the forms as a primary concern. While the backlash of correction has not gone so far as to resurrect the utilitarian functionalism, it has begun to bring focus back to the user's experience. The overlap of dance with architecture in the area of movement, even more than form, seems likely to yield potentially new ways of thinking about the experience of the inhabitants of architectural space. Rather than attempt to render dance movements solely with expressive forms as has generally been attempted so far, architects could shift their focus to rendering movements with movements. India has a long-standing love affair with dance as evinced from the plethora of folk dances and more formalized dances that abound in the country. Some of the earliest records of dance can be found in the Bhimbetka caves in Madhya Pradesh, India. Besides the cave painting, bronze figurines from the Harappan civilizations and later sculptures that adorn several temples all bear testimony to the importance of dance in Indian culture. Thus, this seems an ideal place to research ancient movement theories. The Natya Shastra. India has a dance tradition that has been codified verbally and has been interpreted and taught in an oral tradition that has continued over centuries. All ancient dance forms in India are based on Natya Shastra, a religio-cultural text attributed to sage Bharata Muni and dated anywhere between the 2nd century BC to 2nd century AD. The Natya Shastra is one of the oldest written work on the subject of movement. It describes dance movements in written language, creating a system of articulation that is based on the scale of possible movements by the body. The Natya Shastra details out every minute movement of all the parts of the body and combination of the same to form sequences of varied meanings. This includes descriptions and explanations for postures, angikas, hand gestures, mudras, movements of lower and upper limbs, neck, hip, eye, eyebrow, etc. Gait, karanas, that is combined movements of hands and feet, angaharas, that is karanas, and charis. In Natya Shastra, the empirical and metaphysical were held together as an organic whole. Bharata, in an explicit statement, refers his formulation as being derived partly from physical and partly from physiological systems. Such details of movements and expression recorded herein could obviously have not been formulated in vacuum. They went at the very least based on preceded document and oral tradition. Thus, the abiding principles and the pervasive ethos of the text must have their origin in ancient thoughts, truths and theories that are all but lost to us. The more deeply we penetrate the technique of any Indian art, the more clearly we see that what may seem spontaneous, individual, impulsive and natural to the lay spectator is in reality very well considered, long inherited and minutely studied and imbued in a highly symbolic significance. The conception of all the directives in the Natya Shastra is obviously the result of a keen perception of kinetics of the human body and its physical possibilities to evoke specific states of emotions, directions and definitions through the manipulation of volume, weight and line. Though the painstaking written description and clarification of each movement of the body seems to approach the form of movement from the exterior, from a spectator's viewpoint, its emphasis on physical balance and the expression of feeling and moods denote a concern with the dance's own experience at least equally. This quality marks any form of movement that follows the principles of Natya Shastra to be suitable study for lucidity on the bodily experience and how the body intuitively reacts in the space. While a practical study would allow a more experimental understanding, the detailed and specific structure of these dance forms ensure the clarity and precision required for an objective study. Bharatanatyam is arguably the most formalized and developed of the dance that are embodied in the ancient treatises, such as the Natya Shastra and Nandikeshwara's Abhinaya Darpan. This South Indian classical dance form is essentially a form of dance theatre that aspires to communicate the eternal truths of body and space weaved into mythical legends. The techniques and symbols employed have been well structured and codified. The name itself is an acronym for the constituents of the dance: Bhava, Raga, Tala. This refers to the meaningful expression, the accompanying melody, the regulating percussion. Thus, it has movements expressed respectively. Bharatanatyam has two principal aspects to it, namely Nritya or Adavu, Jati, the purely rhythmic, which is confined to footwork and the movement of the body and the hands, and in which, absent emotions, there is no portrayal of sentiments, and Nritya or Abhinaya or mime, which is conveyed through gestures and facial expressions. It is suggestive, expressive and interpretative dance, and every movement and gesture in this aspect is embedded with meaning. Renowned danseuse Bala Saraswati describes it as the suggestive language of imagination. Combination of these aspects, supplemented by specific postures and gaits, form the overall composition of performed dance. The concentration here will be on the Nritya aspect, which is a precise art based on strong principles. These sequences have clearly been developed and intense geometrical exploration by the mind through the human body of space and time. They strike highly studied poses that are by no means static in nature, are consecutively connected and emphasized through relatively temporal movement. Bharatanatyam possesses a certain sculptural quality. Its emphasis is on pose and stance and not on continuous movement. Series of poses, almost static in impression, are concerned through movement. This conception may be equated with a series of definite space that are connected and thus perceived as a single space. Adam Hardy, in his studies on Indian dance, concludes that the dance comprises of series of elements to be sensed not as a chain of separate entities, but as the same thing seen several times at different stages, evolving and proliferating. This may be understood as a quest for permanence through ephemeral methods. Just as we earlier observed in architecture, the dynamism in Indian dance technique too springs from the concept of timelessness. Bharatanatyam, however, does not attempt a literal permanence, but constantly attempts to obtain the perfect pose that will convey a sense of timelessness. Sequential trials to realize this metaphor result in dynamic that implants an inner stillness of its own. Geometry. In Indian dance, the human body has been conceived of as a mass which can be equally divided among the central median. Further movement is determined by the nature of deflection from this medium. The dancers increase an awareness among all who experience this movement to the elemental shapes of a body can make. Through the dancing body, one can experience the same primary shapes, orthogonality, symmetry and perpendicularity that exists in nature. In most sequences, one experiences a sense of rhythm, symmetry and process that are almost synonymous to classical architecture as well. The focal aspect of dance include a constant emphasis on the purity of line, symmetry, a strong connection to the ground and the principles of balance. Every posture and movement is conceived with these values always being foremost. The body geometries thus formed and implied include lines, curves, squares, triangles, circles, coils, etc. All these geometrical motifs have their own logic and meaning. While the circle represents a continuum of time, the square denotes a perfect form suggesting order. The triangle contains the strongest linear cohesion and appears to contain unassailable unity in plurality. The Natya Shastra uses this with extraordinary sensitivity and understanding. Bharatanatyam has distinguished movements and postures that differentiate from other classical dances. The body is broken into distinctive units that move in synchrony. The head forms the first unit and lateral movements of the head are common. The torso is seen as another unit and is hardly ever broken up into upper and lower torso. The lower limbs are seen as either straight lines or two sides of an imaginary triangle in space. The upper limbs either follow the lower limbs or weave circular patterns along space which is governed by the lower limbs. It is the latter aspect along with use of torso as a single unit that gives Bharatanatyam its particularity. Posture. The geometries involved and suggested in Bharatanatyam are simple, yet profound at once. These patterns formed are further enhanced and clearly perceived because Bharatanatyam is conceived more as a series of postures that are connected through movement rather than simply a continual exploration of space. Each posture possesses intense depth of meaning and indicates several layers of understanding. The basic posture itself is called Ayata Mandala, Araimandi in Tamil. Mandala meaning circle. Just as the galaxies of the manifest world spun around their own axis, so did the body as mandala. Mandala denotes a magical circular diagram or shrine which signifies creation and life. It is fundamentally a multidimensional principle of space which is rooted as well as radiating. It has a focused center which is generally considered as the navel of the body. Not just the basic posture, but all stances in Bharatanatyam inscribe the body within its mandala. The space, thus defined by stance, may be perceived as temporal mandalas that connect to define the polarization of an area. Within these self-inscribed boundaries, the body is conceived as an erect man with his feet equibalanced and equidistant from the hypothetical vertical central median, that is Brahma Sutra. Corresponding to the physical pull of gravity, variations of such balance postures, which primarily involve lowering the center of the body by spreading the legs apart from varying distances, while maintaining the symmetry and equilibrium, are used in Indian classical dances. Such standing positions have been detailed in the Natya Shastra, where Bharata has referred to them as sthanas. While the standing position is known as Sampada Sthana, the basic posture of Bharatanatyam is the Vaishnava Sthana. This position is more popularly referred to as the Araimandi position, which literally translates from the Tamil as half sit. Here, the knees are bent sideways and the distance between the feet is increased to two talas, which may loosely be measured as the length of a foot. Though such positions, attention is drawn to the symbolism of the line, triangle and square. The most critical factor in dance is the ability of the artist to perfectly execute the moves with good posture, definite articulation of the limbs and purity of line. Limpness in any form dilutes the geometrics, its impact and the energy produced through dance. The gesticulation of the hands is the most visible focal characteristics of classical dance. Definite hand gestures are referred to as hasta mudras. The mudras imply specific meanings and different combinations and movements may indicate myriad precise meanings. They are universal and used like the alphabets of language. Hand movements or nritya hasta are of 5 kinds: upward, downwards, to the left, to the right and to the front. Bharatanatyam, being such a symmetrical dance form, the movement of hands is usually similar to that of the feet. That is, the right hand usually moves with the right feet and vice versa. The position of the feet with the different movements are described in the old tradition as padabandhas. The basic position are the mandalas, the posture stuck while executing movements, utplavana, jumping or leaping movements, brahmaru, flight movements, or padacharu, that is the gait. The mandala is of course the most recurring movements, usually as the Araimandi posture. Posture in dance are never perceived as static, but exhibit a dynamism sans motion. It is the self-portrait of a being and articulates beautifully that moment of seeming stillness when the body is poised for the most subtle yet intense action. It represents a moment of greatest potential energy. Karanas are certain defined combinations of hand and feet movement in dance as prescribed in the 4th chapter of Natya Shastra. There are 108 Karanas. The Chidambaram Temple, Tamil Nadu, hosts the most ancient set of all 108 Karanas in stone carving. There are, however, not static poses, but action and are made up of beginning, sthana, and intermediate position, chari, and a culminating final position, that is the nritya hasta. It possesses axiality and refinement. This integrated formation is the fundamental unit of movement and the source from which larger movement segments are initiated.